Failed prophecies versus full preterism. Failed prophecies, Jesus predicted the end would come. The resurrection was coming. The apocalypse was coming. The end of the age world was coming. All these things were predicted and they were supposed to happen. Full preterism teaches they did happen. The way the church has defined these things for so long, according to full preterism, is wrong. But you be the judge of that. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Your host, Derek Lambert. We are Myth Vision. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Your host, Derek Lambert. I have a special guest with me today, David King. What's up, my brother?
What's up, brother?
So for everybody who's watching, I've actually been in interaction with David King over the past few years. And I've mentioned a couple times on this program what full preterism is. To make this short, sweet, and simple, and I'm going to let him talk, you have Bart Ehrman and other scholars, Dr. Bart Ehrman and other scholars who say, hey, even Dr. Price, these are failed prophecies. They did not happen. So Christians, usually, who've left the faith, like Bertrand Russell, said Jesus promised. He didn't keep his word. I can't believe in him. He's not the truth. And they leave the faith. Well, full preterists rationalize the text and say, hey, this text gives clear indication something was supposed to happen. I think everybody to some extent agrees something was supposed to happen, but it's almost like Christians have come with an agenda to try and make sure it didn't happen then so that they can keep their Kool-Aid and cracker for Sunday, That's just my opinion. But David, do you want to add something to that? Because you're going to be giving them a little bit of something you've done on the term at hand.
Right. So what is full preterism? So the word eschatology would be the study of end time prophecies. Like in the New Testament, some people believe in the Old Testament. And so full preterism is a branch of that. It's like, so there's 4 different versions of eschatology. This may get super nerdy and boring, but full preterism is the one that says that it was all fulfilled in the first century to the people the books were actually written to. So it's a stance of the prophecies, the end time prophecies. And so Bart Ehrman, where he would sit on that, I know a lot of your viewers would know of his theories. Where he would sit on that was, yes, it was written to a first century audience. These events were supposed to happen to them, but the prophecies failed. You would have full preterism and then Ehrman's theory going side by side. The full preterism says, you know what? No, they didn't fail. It's like a believing stance. A lot of believers will say I'm a full preterist. So a lot of what I'm teaching, what I'll be teaching in this video, is to believers. So it's from a stance as a believer. I'm not a believer. I'm not sure what I am right now, but I'm no longer a Christian. So to match the theme of myth vision, if the full preterism stance is true, then it can say like that. I'm also a version called Israel only full preterism, which means that it was about the 12 tribes, even Paul's audience. If that is the case, it could support the myth theory really well. Because it says that there's the end on the book in the first century, and it disqualifies the early church as valid. So when you hear Dr. Price and Bart Ehrman speak of the early church redefining terms and being different from what the New Testament texts say, this all fits right in with that, and it supports that. So yeah, what is full preterism? It's just a way of looking at the New Testament text, the prophecies, applying audience relevance and time statements. That's what this lesson is going to be about, like at hand, soon, nearly, about to, those kinds of time statements. And you realize that it's speaking to them, it's not speaking to us, and that they were actually going through very real events. Whether the texts were written after the fact, which makes sense, or if it was written before, if it was written after the fact, it was written about the events leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem. It was written about those events. And right. That's where you get answers like, what is hell? What kind of judgment were they going through? What is a judgment? You get all your answers understanding that. So full preterism answers those kinds of questions. Go ahead,
interesting. It is a methodology. Mm-hmm. I've gone out saying clearly, I've mentioned this because What I've done now that I'm a host on Myth Vision, and I've learned a lot from different perspectives, is I like to put in a bag a bunch of different perspectives and methodologies and have them communicate, which is what I'm actually doing here on this program, is bringing guys from all sorts of angles. This is not a pro Bible, pro Jesus, pro any of that type of stuff type of program. However, we are open to alternate ideas, like if Jesus is a celestial myth, if this is a astrotheology, is this full preterism, is it Israel only, is it, and all the different spectrums of thought. And this all goes down to also how we define terms. I mean, man, you can't get a scholar, even a critical scholar who's a non-believer, to agree with another critical scholar who's a non-believer about certain things. So it's like, okay, this is why I want to bring the scholars in, because at least they can look at stuff, break down terms, get a grasp on syntax, understand language, and try and bring something to the table. Problem is, David, and I know you agree with me on this, is that too often these scholars have been, I guess you'd say, they've had so many stones thrown at them by the Christian church and that system of thought, that they've put all their exhausted energy into this giant, massive downhill tumble of dung and the ideas that have come with it, that they're not realizing, look, just let that ball roll by. Let's just go as much into primitive Christianity as possible, disregard the church that's really produced all this content, and see what may be at the base. Now, I know that a lot of times they'll say, well, look, there may be some validity to some how these churches thought. I want to test these things, man. This is what I really want to do. I went on record recently on the show trying to ask the question, do you think, this is to Rabbi Tovia Singer, awesome show, really cool guy, man. I really, one day when I go to Israel, like, I want him to show me, I want to go and check out the spots and stuff. He's actually a cool guy to talk to. I was asking him, do you think these Gentiles in the New Testament that are getting salvation, I never meant Pontius Pilate, never meant that, so to speak. Now, one can conclude going further, maybe there's something there when Paul's writing to the household of Caesar and he's saying, hey, greetings to the household of Caesar in the book of Romans and other places. It's like, why are you greeting Caesar? Regardless of that, I'm talking Acts 17. I'm talking to these churches that are supposedly pagans, that all scholarship saying, yeah, there's probably a mixed multitude here, but there's real outsiders that have nothing to do with Israel in this bunch. I got some feedback from a few guys that commented and were like, now, I didn't get all that out. I didn't get everything I just said here out. Like, hey, do you think Cornelius could have been an Israelite? Do you think there's, like, he could have been some lost tribe Israelite or something? Didn't get that far. I wonder if Rabbi does know about the theory to some extent, because he probably deals with Hebrew Israelite onlyist and the Caucasian versions of Israelite onlyist and stuff. What are they called?
I don't even know, man. I would want to look through that so before I speak it to know that it's accurate. Black Hebrew Israelites is a big one, and then there's so many different versions of it. You've got like a Western version that disagrees with everybody else. Yeah, there are many versions of those streams. The arguments are powerful because they understand two house theology, which I believe you can't understand the Bible without that. Most Christians never realize that even exists until they get into higher learning of some sort, some kind of
And
scholarly.
this is just for our audience. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is northern and southern Israel. Two house theology is the idea that there's a division in Israel, the northern 10 tribes and the two southern tribes, which really, you really see Judah be the survivor, so to speak, tribe. And even critical scholars who don't even agree with this theory or even any theory really about Christianity or anything, they admit that historically speaking, when all this crap went down in history, and some might differ on this, but from what I've been told, 11 of the 12 tribes got like their asses handed to them, and that only one actually made it, and this was Judah. And that maybe there's somehow out there, I guess you could say, maybe there was this weird conspiracy theory even amongst themselves that our people are somewhere in the mix of all these people, and I don't know.
Yeah, two house theology is about the split northern kingdom, southern kingdom, and then you'll start noticing phrases like house of Israel and the house of Judah. And the house of Israel is speaking of the northern tribes, house of Judah, the southern. And then you see promises being made to both. You see the northern tribes, they're spoken also as Ephraim, the phrase Ephraim or Jacob, you hear that. So there's other words used for them as well. But there's this story in the Bible where they get divorced. They go after the idols, they get divorced. And then modern scholars teach that they were lost to time. But you see the New Testament people speaking to them. You see 1 Peter 1:1, you'll see James speaking to them. So what's going on? They're speaking to them as though they exist. The rabbi that was on recently, some of the arguments that he pitched forward, Matthew 10 and stuff like that, that's stuff that IO gets every day. When we speak about IO, we get that kind of stuff every day. But I'll leave this out there. You got James, you got Peter writing to them, blatantly writing to them as though they exist and they're present during that time. And then in Revelation 7, a lot of scholarship believes that the 144,000, which just meant remnant of the 12 tribes, that's what that meant, 144,000. It's not a literal number. So when you get that, it's a symbolic number. It matches the dimensions of the new Jerusalem and such. And those are all symbolic numbers. That, and then the great multitude that's mentioned after, those are the same group. Those are not two separate groups.
Right.
So once you figure that out, that the end of the story has only a remnant from the 12 tribes going to heaven, right? If you want a symbolic imagery or literal heaven, that's the end of the story. And then there's at the end in the first century. To me, that's a home run for Israel only full preterism. It kind of proves it. Once you're able to iron that out, people get hung up on where it says, the numbers. It uses that can't be numbered, or I forgot how the phrase goes. I'll have to look it up.
Sand of the sea and the whole, yeah, I get what you're talking about, in the nations and tribes and tongues and kindreds. And
and those phrases are always used in the Old Testament to speak of the 12 tribes and them being scattered and such. Those phrases are used for them. Those are their phrases. That's why the great multitude is being described that way. A multitude of nations. Ephraim was promised to become a multitude of nations, a great multitude of nations. So all that stuff adds up.
So a couple thoughts on that, just to poke into this a little bit. When they date Revelation to 96 AD, and they are saying, hey, this is a late document, okay? Does Israel only have to stick within the 70 AD framework, or could it be somewhere around that time? But this 2,000-year bullshit has got to stop. I mean, let's admit that notion of somehow one day down the road where we're at, that it's going to happen, right? I mean, if it didn't already happen, it's not going to happen. And if it has happened, it's probably not correctly understood to have happened the way people think it's supposed to happen, correct?
Right. So the stance on that, and there's really not an IO stance on that, because IO is not really about that. It's not really about textual criticism and such. It's about what does the story actually say and who's it spoken to. So that's what IO would stand for. So that's why you would have so many different versions of IO. You would have atheist IO, and you would have full, hardcore believer IO. I mean, if it was written in 95, it was written about the events leading up to 80-70. It was written as though it was written before then. That's how all that would line up. If it was written before 80-70, that gives it more credibility. It's written about the events leading up to it.
Which would obviously, my stance, how Myth Vision, I'm such a bro. Look, just show me, I'm Thomas. Okay. He didn't yell at Thomas. Okay. He didn't scream at him and say, you dumbass, why didn't you just believe me? No, just show yourself, prove it. Okay. Make sure I'm not on dimethyltryptamine or tripping on mushrooms when this happens. And I might go get my mental health checked real quick before I end up.
Yeah. A lot of people get thrown off because it uses phrases like cosmos and world, and those who dwell on the earth, earth and stuff like that. And
land, right? It's a land.
Exactly. When you go into, it's gay, I think it's GE. When you go to that's the land, talks about those who dwell on the earth. It could be talking about those in Palestine, because it's those who dwell in the land, the promised land. So those phrases, you start learning that those are actually very small contexts. They're not global contexts. The partial preterists are brilliant at discovering that. The full preterists are usually your more advanced versions. They not only discovered it, but they see it elsewhere and they take it to its full implication. I believe it's impossible to get out of full preterism if you're going to give any credibility to the Bible at all.
Right.
I feel like that it's a no-brainer. And that, again, whenever you hear the early church fathers speaking as though they don't know what they're talking about, they argued about the dumbest things that had nothing to do with them. So the Mosaic covenant, the Mosaic law, even the 10 Commandments as part of the Mosaic law, all of that stuff was only given to Old Covenant Israel. It was part of a vassal covenant between Yahweh and them, and it involves nobody else, right? For them to be arguing about, should we circumcise? Should we do all these other things? They're arguing about like how much of the law to keep and such. Well, if they were actually connected to an apostle, an actual person of the story that knew what they were talking about, they would not be arguing about that kind of stuff. If you were to discover a text and plug yourself into it and not have real discipleship or teaching, you would sound like the early church fathers.
Do you think that when Rome conquered, that they adopted this text, winners write history, or the idea that winners own history? They may not have written some of this stuff. They played with the text. You're clearly studying that now. You're writing books on this stuff. You're going to touch on this and the Trinity, these concepts that have been probably interpolated and stuff. Do you think that that might be why they took it? Is they conquered people because they were known to do that before when they'd conquer foreign nations, foreign gods. They adopted their gods. They took these people's gods and brought themselves. Now, I asked that because one of my objections at this moment, and I'm pretty open about like where I'm at in my journey, on the show, is that, and then this varies among IO. Once again, Israel only for those watching, is that outsiders cannot have native born kids join and be part of the covenants. And I've looked at a few of these verses and I'm like, that sounds like foreigners can come in, but their children will then have to become. But technically what that means is that doesn't mean Israel becomes outer. Okay. That means you literally have to become Israel to even have this wrapped around. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying like, hey, let's bring in, we're going to give Torah to the whole world. Everybody's going to follow the law of Moses. Okay. It's the idea that you're going to come in to covenant with it or you're not part of it. And to me, that's where I kind of like agree with DaCosta on this based off these verses. And I know why
Yeah,
IO disagrees in other
Ezekiel,
areas.
I think Ezekiel 47, you'll see some of it there.
Yeah.
And then Isaiah, maybe 56 or something. You'll see some stuff there too.
Do you think there's contradictions in the Old Testament? Because I know you're different than most, and you'll say, yes, there's contradictions in the Bible. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, dude, it's there. But do you think
Yeah.
that maybe there's one teaching that gives the idea and then another that doesn't? And it's like,
Well, so this is my point of view. This is not an IO stance.
right,
This is just, it's not an IO topic. It is, but what I'm about to say isn't really, I haven't heard any other IO people speak like this. But so Ezra and Nehemiah, after the exile, when they were returning, I believe that they believed that the reason that they had suffered is because they have all these non-Israelite people in their family circles and such. So they were about purging the 12 tribes, or at least they kept that return for the Second Temple period, which would have just been Judah, that they returned for that. There's theories out there that it's just the Levites. So Ezra and Nehemiah, they're saying, we need to purge of everybody that's not 12 tribe. If your wife, your kids, that are not 12 tribe, get rid of them, and that's one point of view.
right.
And then another point of view, I believe that there were conflicting authors and that Isaiah or Ezekiel, I need to study really more on this before becoming an authority in it, but I believe that they were conflicting point of views.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, because we'll always bring this up further and down the road. I
Yeah.
love this idea. I really do. I really do. Because it just sees an evolution of thought. Because you find, God knows, look at what it's done in history, bro. And I mean, if people knew, hey guys, there's a tribal deity called El, and there's a tribal deity that, see, you've got Elyon and you've got Yahweh. And literally in the Canaanite religion, they're two different entities. Here
Yeah.
you have, and this is interesting, my buddy. I have to leave him unnamed until you can tell me I can name him. Cause like, I'm very like, dude, I'll talk to somebody like, please, I'm not ready to go public, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. Tell me what you got. And he's like, look, the bottom line is northern and southern Israel had two different names and identities for their God. And it is this idea that attaches itself to the documentary hypothesis. But this is why you'll see El Elyon, and this is why you'll see Yahweh, and you'll see both
El and
these
Yah.
being used. Yeah, El and then Yahweh. And it's like, this is not necessarily the same exact guys using the same. But of course, this is an evolution of thought. And today, I suspect people say, "Oh, it's the same. We just called God this, and it's the same thing." Depends on what you believe, I guess, in terms of this.
My first exposure to JEDP theory was through a book called Who Wrote the Bible. I would recommend that if you want to go deeper into that. But so that would be a foundational exposure to it. And then there's been a lot of work done after that book was written to, give further credit, discredit, evolve the theory into more, writers. That we're out of my comfort zone when it comes to that. But I've had some.
I'm just talking,
Yeah, I get it.
I know. And no, dude, if you guys, please, I'm going to say this up front. Make sure you go subscribe to David's YouTube channel. Okay. It's DK channel, right?
DK's channel. Yeah. So my name is David King. I just put DK on a lot of stuff, but DK's channel, and that channel. So my current, I've currently left religion like over the last 2 years. And so most of my new content for that channel will be atheist apologetics, just unpacking like morality. And like, I now believe that secular morality is more advanced than religious morality. So I'm going to explain those kinds of concepts. So that channel is about that. If you would like Israel only information, there's actually a YouTube channel called Israel Only Information. You can look that up. There's a guy named Ryan McKittrick that has a channel called All Prophecy Fulfilled. And so you can see a lot of full preterism content there and Israel only. So if you want to see the arguments of how Cornelius could have been an Israelite, he's got a series on that. And it's really good. It's actually the series is in right now. And then if you want more full preterism content, just strictly full preterism, it'll be coming from the viewpoint as a believer. Revelation Revealed, it's the name of that channel. This lesson is attached to our interview here. At hand time statements is going on that channel eventually. So
Okay. Yeah, I like that you don't close off discussion with others. However, I know where you stand. Like, you're kind of agnostic, and I'm not trying to say what you are by putting a label, but you don't know, and you're not going to act like you do. And then, of course, you open up the door for all the other people. Oh, you're what? No, well, technically, by definition, that means shut up, dude. So I really enjoyed this discussion because I think so much can be said. Where I'm at today is I'm not certain all 27 books are teaching the same doctrine, but I am obviously clearly seeing that First Peter, James are directly addressing this idea that kind of ties into some of the stuff I was explaining off air here earlier about the documentary hypothesis. And you have the different versions of the Hebrew scriptures, from the Greek version that's copied the Masoretic to the Masoretic to the Samaritan Pentateuch and the OG original Greek LXX, and all these different books carry different sects of Judaism. And you got to go, what the hell's going on, man? By the time you get in the New Testament, they're still talking about it. There's a reason it's being mentioned. I think that there were different sects of Christianity. I'm keeping my mind open to, personally, keeping my mind open to why certain versions of Christianity might have taken over, which allowed people who were non-Israelites in, and they evolved. It wasn't the most original, though. In my opinion, the most original Christologies in Christianity were Jewish to the freaking core, and there's an evolution, and certain kinds of Christianity started to win. Now, whether that's political, and Rome said, hey, let's kind of allow this to have more favor so that we can get rid of these nutcases, nut jobs who are trying to attack us in 66 AD for the sake of argument or something. I don't know. Just throwing it out there that you could take something that makes absolutely no sense for you and somehow incorporate yourself into it. I don't freaking know, David. This is why I do what I do, man.
Yeah, on that topic, textual criticism, I've got some content I can hook you up with from Yale. And the way that they can find out who wrote what, the way they can predict who wrote what, or they can take a list of what this author of this one book believes. These are their doctrinal stances. And then they'll find out, and they'll list them all out, and they'll find out that they don't agree. So when it comes to Paul, of the 14 books that are attributed to him in mainstream Christianity, maybe 13, 14, I'll say 14, and just add Hebrews in there.
Yeah, in mainstream, yeah.
Yeah.
Hebrew.
7 are left out of those 14. I'm adding Hebrews. 7 are left with a common voice. So then you've got like, I don't know, Colossians, and there's another one, maybe Ephesians, with its own voice. And then you've got the pastoral books. There's 3 of those: Titus, First and Second Timothy, which I believe were written much later, like 2nd century, just outside of the story, because they're arguing about things that have nothing to do with the rest of the text. To me, it's totally, it's like foreign. It shouldn't even be in there, and then it attributes itself to Paul. Anyway, so stuff like that. Textual criticism, they can compare. So I'll give you this Yale series, and if anybody else wants to leave a comment below, it's a free YouTube video series from Yale. Check it out. It's worth
Can't
checking out.
beat it, man. Can't beat it. So David, you're producing a lot of content, or you're going to start producing a lot of content on DK's channel. You have any way for people to contact you if they want to reach out just to discuss this theory more?
So I've got an Instagram, David King 588, but it's almost just a straight up atheist Instagram. A lot of stuff that I post, it's just my journey out of religion. So if you're into that, you'll dig that Instagram. You can reach me through that. And then I don't know how much more I want to give right now. So I have a Patreon. You can reach me there. And I've set a certain level up to where you can have just instant access, because it takes a lot when you have a lot of people asking you advanced questions. So, I mean, I've got a blog site it's kind of a rough draft blog site. I'll write something now and then visit it again a year later and refine the information. So that doesn't mean everything's always accurate. But
you also have Facebook groups, and right now you've been completely blacklisted for dumb reasons. And you're like Jesus Christ, bro. like I hate to say it, I just gotta call it out, man. You persecuted for my name's sake. I mean, by your stripes we are healed, brother. And look, you're now in the underworld at this moment, but I believe
in a
that
resurrection.
You better.
I
And
will
if this ever
rise.
happens again, a second coming of David King. I mean, I don't know if we're in between. Where are we at in this? Are you
right now? We're at a third coming. There are multiple comings.
Oh man, hey, go check him out. He's got Israel only groups on Facebook. All you got to do is search him in the top. And a lot of you guys who've like talked with me that aren't into this, I add you guys to some of these rooms, right? I haven't added you to all of them, and I haven't really spent enough time. I just recently had a piqued interest in really trying to solve the mystery, the puzzle. Are we like really confused on what's going on? Well, maybe. So I wanted to add some really smart guys I know to some of these groups. And David King has spent quite a lot of time compiling information and like putting an information, like all this stuff together, so you guys can at least clearly see what they say. And I would honestly say to anyone who's going to be intelligent about this discussion and not come at this biased, in my opinion, David, especially those who are going to be skeptical of the position, I would handle definitions. I would define terms. I would come at it from a term point of view if there are issues, and try to see, at least give it a shot, right? So you got to test something, but you also want to critique in the process, and that's how science does things and gives the best guess. My guess at this moment, I'm predicting, I don't know, because I'm not scholarly in any way, shape, or form. I might read a book every other month, and then I do a lot of absorbing through audio and video, and then communicating through phone and all. But my best guess would be some of these texts may not, like you said, they might have been written much later. And then some of them, there might be a core that's IO, and then some crap happened to it. And that would be my guess. I just very much doubt that little children passed through 2,000 years of priest and didn't get molested. Please go subscribe to his channel, guys. Let's help David grow. He's a good friend of mine. He really is. And he's been an inspiration. He's someone I can run to that knows Israel only inside and out and doesn't get heated. He's what I love about him is like, even if I'm wrong, like, what the hell do I have to lose? Like, at this point, I've deconstructed hell's not real, which he does a lot on hell. Be on the lookout. He's going to be talking to Dr. Price. They're going to be doing something, because I'm going to set that shit up, and I'm going to make sure that you got this. Hell is going to be an awesome show, and I can't wait for you to also explain what you found and maybe toss that in the mix when you guys are on there. That'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks, man.
let's get into this lecture that you're going to teach us about at hand. And keep in mind when you hear this, he's talking to believers. You even make a few comments in there about, well, believing scholars say,
Yeah.
I think it's great. I think this was a good one. And we need to bring more to the table, because at hand is just like that much of anything a full preterist has ever delved into material wise. That's just like 2 words. It's like, English words. The worst position though that I've heard trying to come back at this stuff is what's the eschatological view that things repeat same over and over, and it's idealism. And I think that's like a rebuttal. I think idealism's trying to make sense why, and I know there's full preterist idealist, but I'm saying idealism, the eschatological view, is like trying to
Yeah.
fix the problems. They're trying to make sense
Well,
of why things are problems.
yeah. So the way I understand idealism is it can be and mean anything, and you don't need patterns. You don't need the Old Testament to tell you what it means. Like, I have a hard time honoring and respecting the concept where your foundation is that this is true and this is this, and that God must be a good God. So all this harshness must mean other things. It must mean left brain and right brain and my third eye and the chakras in just any kind of new agey whatever, and consciousness, and like those are the words you hear over and over in my exposure to idealism. So I just have a hard time paying attention to it.
Or
Yeah.
like the 7 churches which are in Asia are the 7 chakras, or they're like, this is
Yep.
the 7 ages, or the 7 days in which creation, like they come up with the
Yeah.
most, like, I have never. And now, dude, I'm not closed off to there maybe mysticism or some form of like maybe even like a Merkava type mystic type interpretation of things. I mean, Paul comes on the scene talking about the third heaven. I've never heard that in the Old Testament, right? So there might be some mystery school stuff,
Hmm.
but I don't think the 7 churches which are in Asia are necessarily saying that. If there's something there, I'm yet to uncover these things, but yeah,
Yeah, I don't
anyway.
think that they knew anything about. I don't know when third eye or no, theory came out, but a lot of what we have today, what we understand about science, those terms and understandings were just not available during that time. So to say that they had a supernatural inspiration and that that's what they were talking about, I think that I don't think anybody in that era would have even, it wouldn't have been on their map. You know what I'm saying? Those kinds of questions. Yeah, that's my theory of idealism. I just feel like it's a waste of time. That's my opinion on that.
Unless you like to make stuff whatever's comfy to you, and fuzzy wuzzy is like I call.
Or you want to start a cult and control people and tell them that they can't understand a text unless they're speaking to you, and get it from you. That's when I would use idealism. So,
We might need to talk business when we get off of here, brother.
mm,
Well, I appreciate you joining me, man. And we definitely have this good 20-minute video. I think it's 15 to 20 minutes, something like that.
it's about 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, this is good. So be sure to check it out, because this show is at hand. And, I hope you guys like this and comment, because we want to hear your thoughts about the theory. We want to hear your thoughts about what you think about it, the text. If you have issues with it and you come at us as a fundamentalist, we probably won't even respond. But if you do have some actual weighted evidence on why you have criticisms, please bring those to the table. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. And with that, David, we will have you back for
Yes,
sure.
sir. Hmm.
Because I really appreciate you, man. I really do. Seriously, you've been a safeguard for me when I'm losing my shit and I need to talk theology or just talk about something crazy. I
Hmm.
can call you. You really vent to me, or I vent to you. Really, like 90% of the conversation is really me all the time, and I hate doing that to you. But you've been patient, man. So with that, everybody give me a round of applause. Let's do this. All right, brother.
Talk to you next time.
All right.
See ya. that. So at hand, some of the etymology of the word, like today we use it to mean focus on the task at hand, the immediate task is what you're immediately focused on. But as far as like the change between the first century to today, I don't know. But I know that biblically it meant something totally different. So in the biblical context, the phrase was used to describe a soon coming event. So this is Old Testament and New Testament. And so it was always speaking of something that was soon to come, very near, at arm's length, at hand. So note in these examples how all of these are speaking of soon to happen events. So Matthew 26:18, you've got Jesus said his time to be crucified was at hand. Jesus speaking about Judas, his betrayer, fulfilling an event that was to happen soon. It was at hand. Matthew 26:46. John 7:2, John said the Jews' feast of booths was at hand, and it was an event that was soon to happen for them. So the next, he said, go into the city of a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. So Matthew 26:18, this was an imminency statement. Something was soon to happen. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Matthew 26:45. So these are all imminency statements. These were soon to happen statements. Let's cruise through some Old Testament examples, and then once we get to the New Testament, it gets super interesting. It's going to be quirky if you haven't heard it before. All right, Jeremiah here was speaking of Moab's soon-to-happen destruction that some scholars believe took place 23 years after the prophecy was given. These are believing scholars that would say this. The fall of Moab is at hand. Her calamity will come quickly. Jeremiah 48:16. Hosea here was writing to the northern kingdom about their soon-coming invasion from the Assyrians in 721 BC. The days of punishment are coming. The days of reckoning are at hand. Let Israel know this, because your sins are so many and your hostility so great. The prophet is considered a fool and the inspired person a maniac. Hosea 9:7. So these are all imminency statements. Joel here was writing to the southern kingdom, Judah, about their soon coming invasion in 586 BC. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy hill. Let all who live in the land tremble. For the day of the Lord is coming. It is close at hand. Joel 2:1. A day of the Lord was a climatic event sanctioned by Yahweh to judge a nation. So usually it was one army invading a people. Most times, Day of the Lord was used to describe an outside army coming in to invade Israel. There are days of the Lord in the Old Testament. People that try to say that if it says Day of the Lord, it's only speaking of one climactic event at the end of time, in our future. They don't know their Old Testament. Okay, so Isaiah here was speaking of Babylon's soon coming invasion from the Persians in 539 BC. Hyenas will inhabit her strongholds, jackals her luxurious places. Her time is at hand, and her days will not be prolonged. Isaiah 13:22. So as Isaiah is writing about something that was soon to happen to them, in Isaiah 14, you've got the whole taunt to Nebuchadnezzar and the fluke of people putting the word Lucifer there. That'll be another audio as well. That whole chapter, Isaiah 14, was about the fall of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, here's where the phrase gets super interesting. So we're going to go into the New Testament now. John the Baptist said to an old covenant Israel audience to repent, for the kingdom of heaven / God, it's the same thing, kingdom of heaven and kingdom of God, was at hand. So we got Matthew 3:2, Matthew 4:17, Mark 1:15. Matthew used the phrase kingdom of heaven, and Mark used the phrase kingdom of God, but it was the same phrase. They meant the same things. You can look at these three verses and see that John the Baptist is talking about the same exact events, and they're getting quoted in two different ways to prove that. But it was used to speak about the new covenant and what was coming to Israel in the first century. Peter said the end of all things. This is weird. So Peter said the end of all things was at hand there in the first century. So the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. 1 Peter 4:7. At hand was a phrase that was always speaking of an event that was soon to happen to the original audience. And Peter is using it to speak of the end of all things. So let's go on to see what Peter is talking about. We'll see that in a minute. We'll get to that point here in a minute. So we start with John the Baptist telling Old Covenant Israel to repent for their sins sins committed against the first covenant. You can see that in Hebrews 9:15. To prepare for the kingdom of the new covenant, the kingdom of heaven, as quoted by Matthew. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Matthew 3:2. Afterwards, you see John the Baptist is put into prison, and then Jesus starts to proclaim the same message. From that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Matthew 4:17. Okay, so Jesus then creates disciples to reach the people of Israel who needed to know about the soon coming final judgment of the old covenant and the soon ushering in of the new covenant. Verse Matthew 10:6. But go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So it's a soon coming thing. They were supposed to understand what this meant. All right, so now let's look at what the texts say about Jesus' second coming, the coming of the Lord that was at hand. So they're both the same phrase, coming of the Lord, second coming. It's talking about the same event. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. James 5:7. So James, whoever the writer of James was, uses the phrase at hand, which is the imminency statement. And it's saying the coming of the Lord was at hand. And he's saying this to a first century audience. Who is James speaking to? This is interesting. Who was James speaking to? James 1:1. And it says, James, a servant of God, of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion. Greetings. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. If we apply audience relevance to find out who this is written to, James is writing to the 12 tribes. So the idea that there were only 2 tribes available, and that during this time in the first century, the 10 lost tribes were totally out of the picture and gone, makes no sense in several examples, but this is one big one because James is writing to all 12 tribes, not just to the Jews, the southern 2 tribes. He's writing to all 12 tribes. And to say that the northern kingdom was lost to time, the writers of the New Testament say different. James was speaking to the 12 tribes who were going through various trials to endure those trials because the coming of the Lord was at hand. It was a soon to happen event that they would experience. All right, so now let's take another look at what Peter said regarding the end of all things is at hand. This is the strangest statement. The end of all things is at hand. It was something that was going to happen to them, the end of all things. And this is probably one of the main reasons that a lot of people struggle with, I think, full preterism anyway, is because of these big statements, and then they add their imagination, and that is absolutely everything, and they don't know what these people are talking about. So who was the audience? Who was Peter speaking to? Same thing, we'll go to the beginning of his book, 1 Peter 1:1, and it's Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, that's Paul's book, Cappadocia, Asia, there's John's book, the 7 churches of Asia, and Bithynia. Peter is speaking to the elect exiles of the dispersion. It's the same people that James is speaking to, the 12 tribes of the dispersion, the elect exiles of the dispersion, same group. Peter is telling them that the end of all things is at hand. Okay, so Peter is speaking to the same exiled 12 tribes as James. His audience is a scattered Israelite first century audience. So Peter is saying the end of all things is happening. James is saying really strange things to them. What's going on? So what was the meaning of the end of all things is at hand? In Luke 21, I believe this is an example to kind of give us an idea. Luke 21:20 through 22. But when we see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, so this happened in AD 70. This was fulfilled in 87. When we see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So this is obviously not talking about a global audience. Those who in Judea were to flee them, and those who are inside the city, what city? Jerusalem, depart, and let those who are out in the country, so the country surrounding Jerusalem, don't enter it. For these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. So those who are in Judea flee, those who are in the city flee, and those who are in the surrounding countries don't go to the massive fortress where you think you would be protected. Don't go to the temple. Don't go to the city of Jerusalem. And that those are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. So the end of all things, and to fulfill all of that is written, I believe it's speaking of the same thing. The fulfillment of all things written that is at hand. I think that's what Peter meant there. Now note how the end of the book of Revelation, this is interesting, it uses the phrase at hand. The end of the book of Revelation states that prophecies in the book were at hand. And this is Revelation 22:10. People that say that Revelation ends at 19 and the rest of the book of Revelation is for the future, we have a time statement in Revelation 22:10 that locks the last chapter down to the first chapter. You'll see here in a second. Then he told me, do not seal up the words of this prophecy of the scroll, which is the book of Revelation, because the time is at hand. So this is a time statement at the end of the book. John is told that the prophecies of the book were all prophecies that were soon to take place. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Take a look at these time statements that show without a doubt that the prophecies were expected to take place during that first century generation. Beginning of the book. I don't know if I'm going to read all these, but you can look through this and see, but I'm going to give you some big ones. So Revelation 1:1, we start the book out, and the book is being written about things which must shortly take place. Revelation 1:3, the time is near. Revelation 1:9, John is saying that he's going through the tribulation with his audience that he's writing to. So it's a first century audience. Revelation 1:19, the things that are about to take place, that the word mello is there. Mello means about to. Revelation 2:10, do not fear any of those things which you, first century 7 churches, a first century audience, are about to suffer. This book is to a first century audience. Repent, I come to you quickly. This is a judgment statement, or it's a saving from their last judgment that they were about to experience, because the gospel was all about being saved from a soon coming wrath. That's what the gospel was about. So Revelation 2:25, nevertheless, what you, first century audience, have, hold fast until I come. So we're applying audience relevance. We're seeing about to, quickly. This one's interesting. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is about to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. This is a prophecy pertaining to a king for Israel. So even all the nations there has some leadway to still be talking about the 12 tribes. That'll be a whole nother audio on that. Revelation 22:6. So now we're going toward the end of the book, and there are time statements here that lock it down to the beginning of the book. Things which must shortly take place. Revelation 22:6. Behold, I am coming quickly. 22:7. Revelation 22:7. Some people say, this is funny. So some people try to say that I'm coming quickly. It means that that whenever Jesus comes, it's going to be a very quick coming. Not that I'm coming soon, not a time statement, but how fast he's going to come. So when he comes in the clouds, it's going to be very fast. Somehow everybody's going to see it, but it's going to be super fast, like lightning. That's how fast he's coming. He's coming quickly.
But first, you gotta get speed. Demon speed. Speed's what we need. We need greasy, fast speed. Now I show you a trick how to get some speed in them legs. I want you to try to chase this little chicken.
Well, what do I gotta chase a chicken for? It's embarrassing,
First, because I said so. And second, because chicken chasing is how we always used to train in the old days.
Yeah.
You catch this thing, you can catch grease lightning.
So that's the futurist understanding of this verse. Preterists know well. We know that it means that I'm coming soon. That this audience, this first century 7 churches audience of this book, they were supposed to know that this was all going to happen soon. Revelation 22:10, the time is at hand. That's the at hand phrase there. Revelation 22:12, I'm coming quickly. 22:20, I'm coming quickly. I think that's enough for us to know that the book of Revelation is written to a first century audience about things that were going to happen to them. The phrase at hand is a time statement. It's an imminency statement. It was something to happen soon. So conclusion, 4 good points. At hand was a phrase to describe a soon coming event. It was always speaking of something soon to come, very near, or at arm's length. When applying this insight as a time statement in the New Testament, we can see that all of those prophecies regarding the coming of the Lord, the second coming, the end of all things written in the law and the prophets, were at hand. All right, so if this is your first time to hear something like this, there are some YouTube channels, if you're into YouTube videos, that you could check out that I think you'll like. I've got some listed here in this last slide. There's 5 here from really good people. This is mostly full preterism information. This is not IO information. So Revelation Revealed is almost full preterist, basically full preterist stuff. All Prophecy Fulfilled is one of my favorite channels. Ryan McKittrick, shout out to Ryan. Don Preston, Micah Stevens, and Tony Denton. These are their channels. They're full preterists. For people that don't like Israel only, this is an option for them. So I've got a link to my blog at the bottom right, and my Patreon if you're interested in giving $1 a month. So I could spend, I don't know, on pizza and beer, who knows. And that's it. This is your boy David. Take care, guys. Now let's look at what the texts say about Jesus' second coming, the coming of the Lord that was at hand. Shit. All right. It broke. Oh shit, it just worked.